Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us to this very exciting webinar. I'm going to open up with a few short acknowledgements, and then we'll jump in with our very exciting guests. So let me just introduce myself quickly. My name is Or Rabinowitz. I'm a fellow here with the Yankum Israel Studies Program. It's newly endowed, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it shortly. I'm delighted to welcome you here to one of our webinars, which is a part of the Israel Insights series. The Yankum Israel Studies Program, which was just recently endowed in November, fosters a cross-disciplinary education and research of modern Israel. We're based at the Center for Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. You may know it as the CDDRL. At the Freeman Spogli Institute of International Relations at Stanford. We collaborate with many of other programs at Stanford. We focus on offering courses, mentorship, internships, research support, webinars like this one, and other in-person and online events. So please, if this is of interest to you, log on to our website, join our mailing list, make sure you don't miss any of our exciting offerings. We saw a great response to past webinars, and this webinar as well will be available for you to view on our YouTube channel. We will chat for about an hour, and we'll also open it up for some questions from the audience. So if you want to ask anything, please type it into the question window, and of course, I will address some of the questions to our guest, and you'll hear more about our guest in 1 second. So now that we finished with our introductory comments, please allow me to introduce our guest today. Our guest is Oded Ailam. Oded Ailam is a former head of the Counterterrorism Division in the Mossad, the Israeli Mossad, and is currently a researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. And because Oded has such a particular background, I actually asked him to introduce himself instead of me introducing him, because I feel this would really give you, the audience, a better sense of why we invited Oded here. So Oded, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you. What can you tell us a little bit in terms of your biography so we can tie it into our discussion today?
First of all, thank you for having me on this very prestigious webinar. I will introduce myself. Naturally, I cannot go into nitty-gritty details because of my background, but I will try to tell you some of the things that I've been doing. First of all, I served in the Mossad for 24 years, mainly on the operational arena as an undercover agent and the commander of operations and so on. And afterwards, I was promoted to be the director of the Counterterrorism Center of the Mossad, which I was in charge of all Mossad operations against the bad guys around the globe. And afterwards, I did different senior positions in the Mossad. And the last position I held in the Mossad was the deputy of operation, which is in charge of all operations of the Mossad worldwide. And from that point, I realized that I have no chance of being the director of the Mossad because of two things. First of all, I'm not good enough. Second, I'm a lousy politician. And those two things combined together gave me the idea it's time to quit and turn to a new career. Naturally, I went into what I'm good at. It's homeland security. We had established a company of homeland security. We did projects around the world for nations, enterprises, and so on. Not Qatar, not Qatar. It's very important to emphasize. And then I went into my previous capacity, which is industrial engineer, and established a startup company in the field of industrial quality assurance, and we sold the company. And after I sold the company, I was asking myself what I'm going to do now. And I went into few things. First of all, I went into script writing. I started to writing script for Hollywood, for films, for Europe, and also I'm currently involved in script writing for the Israeli television's three series in the Israeli television. Most of them are based on my personal experience, but not all of them. And also, I came out of the closet regarding the media. And when the war had started, I started to be a regular panelist and commentator on Israeli television, on all channels, and also on international television like Fox, CNN, ABC, NBC, and also European media and newspaper. I also write regularly on the Israeli paper, Israel Hayom, commentating on events and so on. This is basically what I'm doing in the morning. Afternoon is a different thing.
So
So,
sorry.
yeah, and I'm open to your question.
So Oded, we were in touch previously as we were in my professional and academic capacity because we were discussing nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, and Iran was an actor that heavily featured in some of our discussions because Iran is a pernicious actor in the Middle East, not only in the nuclear file, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Um, um, it's spreading its tentacles, if you will, into several other activities which are now basically dominating our agenda, and we're going to focus the first part of our discussion on Iran. Before that, you mentioned that you're writing scripts. I should mention that if you need ideas for a plucky little Israel studies program located in California, my colleague and myself are happy to give you some ideas about that. So
Perfect.
let's start with some of the headlines from President Trump's State of the Union speech yesterday. He didn't focus a lot about Iran. He focused a little bit about Iran's nuclear program. What do you make of it? What kind of scenarios do you imagine going forward in terms of the US-Iranian conflict and perhaps potential Israeli involvement in it?
The the way this administration currently is conducting the crisis is rather peculiar, I must. On one hand, they are submitting very, very harsh and strong statements regarding Iran. They started on a very, very high level of eradicating all the capabilities of Iran regarding nuclear facilities and also regarding the missile program and the proxies, and even went far as human rights and so on, something that is not, I don't think, on President Trump's agenda, human rights. But eventually, all those red lines were written with erased pencil, which means they gradually had stepped down from almost most of their initial demands from Iran, and right now they are focusing on a central issue, which is Iran nuclear program. But we have to understand a few things regarding that. First of all, there are two whispers on President Trump's ear. I mean, the one that whispers on the ear that wasn't affected in the assassination attempt are the trio, which is Witkoff, Tom Barak, and Kushner, and they have their concept regarding the Middle East crisis in Iran. And unfortunately, I must say, their way of thinking and the way they perceive this neighborhood is more like real estate moguls from Atlantic City rather than understanding the essence of the jihad and understanding what are the 3,000 years layers of geopolitical and religion that is involved with the state of mind of the mullahs in Iran. It's not just a give and take program. It's not I'll pay you more to get some peace and quiet. That doesn't work in the state of mind of those people. And those trio seems not to really comprehend and understand even the dialect and the rhetoric that you have to talk with those people. For instance, just a few days ago, there was an interview that Witkoff had made. It was, in my perception, it was outrageous, saying President Trump doesn't understand why the regime doesn't give up and raise a white flag. You don't talk in this terminology to those people. That's not the way you're conducting. So on the left ear, we see this trial and put together some of the Emirates that don't want a major conflict, and I'll get to that later. By the way, what are they expressing in public? Not necessarily what they are saying behind closed doors, and it's sometimes completely different from my background and my experience. I know how it works. I remember many times that I met my counterpart from other countries. Some of them are adversaries to Israel, so-called adversaries, and they were urging me to get those bastards and so on. And the next day he goes out and say, "Yeah, Israel is an aggressor," blah 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 blah. So we have to take into consideration there is a different layers of dialogue that is being conducted right now regarding that. Now, on the other ear, the right ear of President Trump are the more, I think, realistic section of the administration, mainly consisting of Rubio, maybe Hexet, also, I would say, some prominent senators like Lindsey Graham, and so on. And I think they are more realistic in the way they approach this issue, which means there will be no stability to the Middle East whatsoever if this regime stays intact. That's the bottom line. They can sign on any piece of paper, the same paper that Chamberlain had signed in 1938, peace in our time, and so on, and waved it with his hat and so on. That doesn't mean a thing to the regime because they are mastermind in manipulation. They are mastermind in lying, cheating, and betraying. So the only way to achieve any sort of stability in this region is the change of the regime. How to achieve this very, very ambitious goal, this is another story that we'll probably talk about it later. So right now, what's happening, as far as I know, in the negotiation, and I must say I know very little. First of all, I'm not in anymore on in these corridors that I used to be, and also I think the administration is also bewildered right now as to what is the next step they are going to take. I think basically Trump doesn't want to go into a major conflict with Iran simply because of the fact that he had seen what happened in Iraq, he had seen what happened in Afghanistan, and also he had seen what happened with him personally with the Houthis. Let's not forget, America had conducted almost 15 months of a campaign against the Houthis. They launched around 791 assaults on the Houthis. Together with Britain, mainly April and March, it was a tremendous assault on the Houthis. They caused quite a lot of damage. And in the end of the day, the Houthis it managed to shut down 15 drones of Reaper, which is almost like an airplane. It's $30 million drone, 15, and three F-15 that were, I would say, by accident, fell off the carrier where the captain took the right turn to aggressively. And at the end of the day, the Houthis had managed to stay intact, and the Americans were the one who were asking for a ceasefire. So in that sense, uh, President Trump has a little scar on his hand regarding a prolonged campaign against those people. Now, with the Houthis, it's 10% of what's going to happen with once he's engaged with the Iranian. So I think in a way he's reluctant to engage in any sort of long process or campaign that eventually will topple the regime or something like that, but rather the Maduro style campaign, which is let's go hit and run, get this guy out of Caracas with his eyes folded like in business class and get him to America. This is the style that he's looking for. This is what he did with Qasem Soleimani, if you remember. This is what is aiming. Now, the American had managed to create a very, very huge armada and very impressive armada here in the area. It's the second only to the what they did in Iraq in the Iraq War. At that time, we have about two aircraft carriers with all the surrounding battleship. Each one has about 7 to 8 battleships with tomahawks and so on. And we have the Gerald Ford right now, which is very close to Crete with capacity of about 90 aircrafts on it. It's a very impressive and immense force that can conduct a prolonged campaign. You don't believe all this fake news that is running now. Now the generals tells me, no, it's impossible. We cannot go into a long campaign. That's not true. They can manage weeks of campaign. The question is whether Trump wants to get into it. And my perception and my assessment that he doesn't. And the big question right now, is he going to swallow the concession that probably Larjani, the negotiator on behalf of the Khamenei, will submit tomorrow as a way out of climbing down the tree that he climbed, or the hardliners, which I find them much more reasonable and practical, will not allow him to step down from this ambition objectives that he portrayed at the beginning of this campaign. So my bottom line of assumption, and I'm saying that in a very, very, I would say, subtle way, because in the Middle East, the most predictable thing is the unpredictable. I would say that he will not settle for the concession that will be submitted to him by the Iranians. However, he will not go into a long campaign. He will try to strike Iran on a short, very intensive strike. I can elaborate later what I think will be the targets in order to convince them to go back to the negotiation table, but under different terms and remove from the stubborn way that they conduct they are conducting right now. I must say the Iranians, it's very maybe ironic, are more afraid of Israel than they're afraid of the Americans. First of all, they did some scrutiny into the campaign against the Houthis, and they realized that although America had gathered an immense, powerful armada and that can strike them, nevertheless, they understood also the objectives and they understood that this force is not such a superpower that it can topple them. And in their perception, they are willing to absorb some sort of initial strike and then maybe go into some sort of concessions without losing their dignity and pride, because it's very important to understand this aspect within this regime, because giving up on ballistic missiles, giving up totally on the nuclear program, giving up on the proxies, and even giving up on trying to eliminate all sorts of demonstration. For the regime, it has only one meaning: the end of the regime, because it reflects weakness, it reflects hesitation, it reflects that they are vulnerable, and so for them it's a matter of life and death. So in that case, what's going to happen? I think on the regime part, they will be willing to absorb some sort of an American is joint American Israeli strike. Hopefully, that this strike will not eliminate the top echelon of the regime. They are already prepared for that, and then go back to the negotiation table under maybe different terms, and everybody will be happy.
So I want to follow up with some of the things you mentioned. You talked about Iranian strategic calculation and their threat perception. I'd like to tie this to one of the reports I saw a few days ago. So the New York Times reported that the US and other Western security organizations are monitoring increasingly worrisome signs that Iran is perhaps thinking or considering using its proxies directly to conduct what we call retaliatory terrorist attacks against either American targets or Western targets, or perhaps American targets in Europe and the West more broadly, and perhaps in the Middle East at large. So how do you assess this concern? You've worked on this issue, on this file for decades. You have experience with counterterrorism, with Iranian influence in the region. What's the historical context that we should take into consideration when we read a report like that mentioning that there is a concern, a Western and a US concern, that Iran may launch a wave of terror attacks against such targets? What should we take into account?
Very good question. It's an absolute. The answer is very clear. I must first of all make it clear: the Iranians had inflicted the most damage on U.S. and U.S. targets after the 9/11. They, in fact, killed around 1,200 Americans altogether, starting in '83 in the bombing of the U.S. embassy in Beirut,
And
killing
the
around
Marine
63
barracks.
people, and the Marine barrack 241. And then there was also the TWA hijacking and the Hobart Tower in '96. And in a moment, I'll tell you about another thing that I was personally involved with, a story. So also in Karbala and places like this. So it's if in the 9/11 there were about 2,930, I think, casualties, we see half of them that the Iranians inflicted, and yet they didn't pay the price until now. Afghanistan had paid the price. Even Iraq, in a way, had paid the price. But the Iranians did not pay anything for their misconduct and the way they are inflicting terror around the world. Now, the Iranian had built through the years cells and networks of terrorists that are poised for action once they are called. They have huge networks in the US, basically based on Shiite citizens in the US. I did personally, I was engaged in two operations together with the FBI in Dearborn, in Michigan. I don't know if any one of our listeners have been to Dearborn in Michigan. If you walk around Dearborn in Michigan, you are sure that you are in Beirut. The signs, the halal restaurants, the people wearing hijab. It doesn't seem to be at all an American city. It's almost, as I said, it's like living in Tehran in that fact. And so the Hezbollah together with Iranians, together with other proxies, have built networks of sleeping cells around Europe and the United States, ready for action when they are called. And the action will always be given by one man, is the Valayat Faki, the the most prominent leader, supreme leader in Iran, which is Khamenei. He's 86 years old, but he's still in power. He's very dominant. He's very aggressive, and is very much a religious person that is dominated by his belief of the Sharia, the Quran, the expansion of the Shiite. Let's not forget the Shiites are only 12% of the Muslim community around the world. But here, they're almost like a miracle. They became the most influential country in the Muslim world. Everybody's looking up to them, and he doesn't want easily to lose that. And so there is a very, very good chance. The word "good" is not good, but there is a chance that they will retaliate with using terror, and they have the capabilities. And in that case, I want to tell you a little story. Okay, if you remember at the 90s, at the 1992, the Israeli bombing, the our embassy in Beirut in Buenos Aires was bombed by explosive truck, killing 29 people. And then in 94, there was another assassination or another terror against the Amia Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, killing 85, injuring around 300 people. And also there were other terror acts like that. At that time, I was
Oh, excuse
working
me.
in the Mossad.
Pardon.
Yeah. I think it's the Iranians that are saying something.
For sure.
At that time, I was working in the Mossad, and in 1994, I was crossing a street in Bangkok, uh, doing my work as undercover, and I saw people gathering on the street looking at something. It was in April '94, I think. I don't know if it's April or something like that. And I was in curiosity. It was very close to our embassy, and I went there to see what it is. And I saw a car accident. A tanker had hit a motorcyclist. He injured the motorcyclist severely, and the people who were in the cabin of the tanker just ran away. And one of them has just passed me by, and I saw him, but I just saw an Asian guy running away. I didn't pay any attention to that, and so on. And the truck was towed to the headquarters of the Thai police in Bangkok and was parked there. By chance, only a pure chance, it was parked exactly under the office of the chief intendant of the Bangkok police. And because it was a place where they used to park all those towed trucks and so on, it was a tanker. After a few days, they started to smell a very peculiar odor in his office. First of all, they thought it was rats. So they brought a team to try to locate all those rats, maybe in the air conditioning system and so on. And they couldn't find anything. And one of the people had pointed out to the truck, and he said, "I think it's coming out from the truck, from this tanker." And they went into the tanker, they looked inside, and they saw a decomposed body in the tanker. And they looked again in the tanker, and they saw the tanker was full of half a ton of explosives ready to use. All the cables were reaching the place where the driver and the other guy was sitting, and it was an on. which means if it had exploded, it would most probably bring to the collapse of the Israeli embassy. It was about 300 meters from the Israeli embassy, this accident, and pure chance it didn't come out, and by pure chance it didn't explode inside the. So we understood at that time at the Mossad that we are dealing with something very ferocious, with something very on a large scale, and so on. And we started looking for who's behind those operations. And after 2 years, I became the director of the Counterterrorism Center, and I was chasing a certain guy that we give him a code name, the Ghost. That we understood he was the guy who was behind most of the operations abroad, and we couldn't find nothing. We were just swimming in the dark. We couldn't find nothing. He managed to fool us again and again until one day, it was, I remember the exact date was 27th of November 1999. I was going home from at night from my office, and one of my subordinates, genius, a guy really a genius, called me and he told me, "Listen, I want you to take a look at that piece of information." And he brought me a piece of information which shows some sort of a contact between the Baca Valley and East Asia. I will not say where and why and what. And it seems to be like a normal speech between two friends talking about wedding and bringing some presents to the wedding, and so I'm joking about how ugly is the bride and things like that. And seems like a normal conversation with nothing to it. And I asked him, "Why do you think this is peculiar?" He said, "For two things. First of all, the other side in Lebanon is in some way, not directly, I don't know who he is, but is connected to Talal Hamia, which was at that time the mastermind of all those operations that I talked to. And there's another thing. They were talking about a certain place in the Becca where it will take place, and it is closed for uh, reconstruction for half a year. So they made a mistake in their talk using the codes, and we are thriving on mistakes. And so, based on that, he told me, "Listen, this is the ghost, the one who is in East Asia." And so we went there to East Asia chasing the ghost with my team. We were disguised as National Geographic photographers because we went to a very, very harsh area in the jungles, and it was dominated by local groups, jihadistic, very, very dangerous to be there. So we had the cover story. And after we had chased the ghost, we had managed to trace him. It was like a Hollywood movie, what happened there. And then he understood that we are on his tail and he was trying to run away from this place using a connection to an airport somewhere in that area. And when he reached the airports, the dogs were sniffing his suitcase and they found half a kilo cocaine in his suitcase. And he said, I'm not a drug dealer. I don't know what you're talking about. And it was true because this cocaine was installed by us. And later we started investigating him, and we tricked him to think that we are going to. He was from an Indonesian origin, and he was wanted in Indonesia for murder. So we made a whole setup that we are going to extradite him to Indonesia. We took him on a plane, small aircraft, flying him to Indonesia, where death sentence is awaiting for him and for his mother as well. But in fact, we circled the city a few times and we landed in the same place, and he was sure he's in Indonesia before death penalty, and he started to talk. And what he told us is overwhelmed us. He told us an on-the-shelf operation that he was preparing for about 2 years, which should have been the worst terror act in the world's history, which make 9/11 look like a walk in the park. The idea was to attack simultaneously at 6 o'clock afternoon on Friday three cruise ships in the Strait of Malacca with thousands and thousands of American on board, three embassies, American embassies, American library, and two Israeli embassies. All of that was supposed to be carried out at the same moment. Everything was ready on the place, all the explosives, all the boats, all the people. And so we had arrested all of them. It was a very major operation around the Far East. And the bottom line was that everything was prepared in Iran. Everything. His training was in Iran. He even met Khamenei himself, who gave him his blessing to that. And everything was initiated by the Quds force in Iran. What we had uncovered was one operation, but you can imagine that they have on the shelf ready operations like this around the world, and we know for sure that they have. The only thing that is important, whether they are going to initiate it, if they feel with their back towards the wall. And this is the only thing that hinders them right now from giving the green light to those operations around the world.
So I'd like to follow up on it. We talked a little bit about the 90s, the operation, the terror attacks in Buenos Aires against the Jewish community, against the Israeli embassy. You mentioned here how many American lives were lost and how many American targets, or sorry, how many Americans were targeted by the foiled attempts. I think perhaps it's going to be useful for our viewers and listeners to know a little bit of context about 94. You mentioned apprehending the truck near Bangkok. 94 it's basically the height of the Oslo peace process. Is during the Rabin's second term, when Iran was really making an effort to thwart the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, to thwart normalization. We also saw a wave of bus bombing and terror attacks supported by Iran conducted in those years. So these are, in terms of context, perhaps it gives us tools to understand Iranian foreign policy and how the Iranians perceive of using this this branch of their foreign policy, if you will, or this ability. And a lot of these actions are carried out sometimes by people that are affiliated with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is both Iranian and not Iranian. It's the proverbial Schrodinger's cat of the Middle East in this respect. And I'm going to ask you a little bit to expand on that. And I'm going to ask you to tell us what we should keep in mind when we think about Hezbollah in Iran and the Iranian ability to enact terror attacks. But I'm going to focus my question a little bit more, and then, of course, feel free to expand on the directions you think are interesting for us to discuss. So, according to reports from the past month, Hezbollah is under, on the one hand, continue and increasingly growing pressure from Israel. We see a lot of Israeli determination to make sure that the red lines are not crossed, and that the ceasefire reached last year would, if not be upheld, maybe would still be on the table. Maybe that's like the best way to frame it. It's very fragile. It's still a part of the game, even though we're not convinced that it's going to uphold. And on the other hand, we know that Hezbollah is very much attached to Iran, invested in Iran, has close ties with Iran, but perhaps doesn't want to commit organizational suicide alongside Iran. So some of the motivations may overlap, but some of them actually may not be overlapping. There are limits to what Hezbollah can do. The limits, of course, were introduced very much following Israeli actions in the past war. I'm going to let you perhaps expand on this. What should we consider? What should we keep in mind when we think about the Hezbollah-Iranian connection and the different scenarios we need to entertain going forward? And what should we learn from history? What's the context we should keep in mind?
It's a very good question. First of all, let's. I want to remind all of us that there were 10 crucial days regarding the Hezbollah between 17th of September 2024 and 27th of September 2024 that changed the DNA of Hezbollah. And I'm talking starting with the Beeper operation, which is one of the most successful intelligence operations ever that I know, that made a tectonic change in the architecture of any sort of area. I don't remember any sort of an intelligence operation on that scale that had such a tremendous impact on what's going on. Maybe the deciphering of the Enigma in World War II, but it's not on that scale, or maybe an operation the American had conducted in the 60s against the Russian gas pipes in Siberia, but not on that scale that really changed the whole environment of the Middle East, and maybe even the world. And the second thing was of course, on 27th of September, the assassination of Nasrallah. Both of them are, according to foreign sources, are affiliated with Mossad. It's a Mossad work, and so those two major issues that occurred in 10 days had changed completely the perception of the Hezbollah within Lebanon, within the Arab world, and even within the Shia community in Lebanon. They are vulnerable. They are in the lowest position since 1982, where they were established. Israel had also managed to eradicate about 60 to 70% of the missile capabilities of the Hezbollah, and also pushed north all the Radwan forces that was threatening to charge into Israel on the style 7th of October. There is no imminent threat anymore existing on that from Hezbollah. Also, we see elimination of the top echelons of the Hezbollah one by one. I can mention all the names, Fuad Shukor and so on and so on. And you have to remember, Hezbollah is in a way a geriatric organization. All of the commanders in the Hezbollah, all of them who has the knowledge of the organization, are about 60. They're most of them around my age. I'm very familiar with them from they were youngsters like me. And the fact that Israel has managed to eliminate those top echelon has a very significant impact on the organization, because usually a terror organization doesn't thrive or doesn't nurture any successors, simply because of the fact they are afraid that one day this youngster will take over their place. So once you eliminate this layer, the organization is pretty much crippled. And also within the organization, we see a lot of disturbances and between commanders. We just seen for about a week ago, Fik Safa, one of the most prominent hardliners, had stepped down, resigned. This is a very, very uncommon event that happens in such an organization. We almost never seen that before. And this organization right now is crippled, is in a very bad situation. And also we see that the Lebanese government is getting more and more, let's say, intrigued to do something with something
Emboldened,
premeditated.
perhaps.
Right. more bold, more aggressive. But it's a problem because let's not forget the Lebanese army is consists of 60% Shiite warriors. The commanders more or less are Maronites or Sunni or even Jews and stuff like that. But the soldiers are Shia. So if your family, a Shiite family from Nebi Sheet, has five children, three are going to Hezbollah, two are going to the Lebanese army. That's the way it works. And the still the salaries are poor, about $250 a month for a soldier, while if you go to the Hezbollah, you get around 2,000 a month. So, but also regarding the finance, the Hezbollah is in a very bad situation regarding finance. The main financer of Hezbollah was Iran. Now they have problems of even transferring the money. There were rumors that they received about $1 billion in all sorts of transactions and Bitcoin or crypto. That's not true. They're in a very a terrible situation regarding financing, and the Shiite community are asking questions. They say after 2006 war that ended in August 2006, 3 weeks after the war had ended with some devastation in the Shiite villages in the south, the Iranians and the Hezbollah opened big tables in those villages, and each family that had her house was destroyed received in cash $10,000 to rebuild their home. So the reconstruction of the South after the 2006 was so rapid that they almost haven't inflicted any damage on them. Now nothing happens. And so the Shiite community itself is wondering where are all the promises that you had promised to protect us and you had promised that we will flourish and nurture and nothing happens. And so there is a lot of resentment also within the Shiite community against the Hezbollah. But having said that, they haven't said the final word, and their capability to launch some sort of terror acts outside of Lebanon is becoming even more immense because they are, in a way, deterred from involving Lebanon in any sort of escalation right now in the Middle East. So they will prefer, in order to show their affiliation and support to Iran, to use their capabilities abroad more that was anticipated before. So I expect that if there will be some sort of a confrontation between Israel, America, and Iran, the Hezbollah will not join directly. Maybe they will launch a missile or two just to say we did it, okay, but not on a broad scale. But they will certainly will use their capabilities abroad to launch some sort of attack against American, Israeli, and Jewish targets.
So the conflict that we're talking about now is taking part or is unfolding, if you will, against the backdrop of the October 7th war, Israel's war against Hamas, the developments, the political developments in Gaza. And the world's attention is basically pivoted to a possible US-Iranian conflict, while perhaps sidelining, at least temporarily, the developments in Gaza and Trump's motions to set, or Trump's attempts to set in motion developments on the ground. And we've been reading reports about the peace board and the different actors that are likely to be influential as a part of that. And inside Hamas, and I think it's interesting to consider, we know that we have two factions. We have a faction that's more closely aligned with Iran, led by Khalil al-Khaya, a leading figure from Hamas's military wing, and we have an opposing camp that's not as closely aligned to Iran. I wouldn't say that. Maybe I'll leave it at that, and I'll let you take the reign. And probably led by Khaled Mashal and other people that are perhaps more wary of Iranian interference. And then this leads me to the following question. How should we think of developments in Gaza and Trump's ability to put forward and to push forward um, the 20 points plan, the vision he has for the Trump peace board, developments in Gaza on the ground, compared with the different scenarios that we just talked about in the Iranian context. So not only are we talking about two conflicts that have been basically unfolding in parallel and that have influenced each other, and you mentioned this in various points that you made during our discussion, but going forward, this can have a very impactful influence inside Hamas and with what's happening on the ground. So, in your opinion, what are the key insights that we should take into account, and what's the context that we should think about, and what kind of developments should we follow in terms of what happens in Gaza and what happens with Hamas?
I would say something which might sound a little bit bizarre and out of the box. Hamas doesn't need Iran anymore. They have a new friend in town, which is called Turkey and Qatar. They are replacing completely the Iranians on any sort of a scale that you can imagine. Financing, supporting, uh, you name it. They don't need Iran anymore. So right now we see a new, completely different axis that is being created in front of our eyes, which is led by the Muslim brothers in Turkey, in Qatar, supporting the Hamas financially, politically, military, you name it. And the fact that they are part of this peace board, it's I wouldn't say it's ironic, it's pathetic, because they are the one who will not allow under any circumstances to dissolve the Hamas. They will not allow that. And in fact, those two segments had reached the release of the hostages because they were whispering to the Hamas, "You do what we tell you, and we'll keep your back." And that's exactly what is happening right now. In that sense, I think the peace board will not succeed. I think there is no way the Hamas will, under any circumstances, dismantle or disperse its military capability simply for because of the fact that they are afraid of the bloodshed that's going to happen between all those factions within Gaza that Hamas had managed to absorb and to keep them, let's say, on a low profile. They will retaliate for sure. And let's not forget, we are talking about tribes, and we are talking about the bloodshed of tribes and everything that is evolved around there. So the Hamas needs to maintain their capability to hold weapons. First of all, in order to protect themselves against vengeance and retaliation by local, and they have a very, very thick book regarding that. So this is one thing. The second thing, the Hamas strategy is to try to portray some sort of concessions regarding that, but in order to inflict their power over whatever comes out, this new technocrat that we're going to take over in Gaza. First of all, they want about 10,000 policemen to be part of this new regime. All of them are actually Hamas policemen. They want to control the health ministry. They want to control who will be in charge of what. Behind the scenes, they want to adopt in a way the system that had been adopted so successfully by the Hezbollah before the 7th of October in Lebanon. There is a government, and we accept this government, but in fact, we have a veto on almost anything, and we can hold our weapon, and we in fact dictate whatever is going to happen. This is their approach right now. They are they get a very, I would say, positive uh, um, back from Turkey and Qatar. And I think the Americans are making a grave mistake regarding Qatar and Turkey as partners in that concept. I think the 20 points that Trump had made is more like a letter of intent rather than an agreement. It's, when you are renting your house to someone and you write an agreement, you will write first of all what happens if you don't comply with our terms.
Yeah,
When
non-compliance
the,
clauses.
and of course, and this is just a letter of intent. It's nothing to it. If you don't write deadlines, if you don't write very strict lines of what is yes and what is no, and that wasn't the case at all. So I don't see the outcome of this peace initiative as something feasible. I think at the end of the day, it will collapse simply because the Hamas will not comply with the terms of Trump, and the alternative is that Israel will have to be involved again in some sort of military operation. I don't know if it's going to be an overall campaign of conquering the 48% that is left, where the Hamas still maintain its power and grip, or it's going to be some other way like we are doing conducting in Lebanon. But I do not see any way that the Hamas will give up on their grip on the population or the territory.
So thank you, Oded. I'm going to combine a few of the questions and topics that we see being raised in the Q&A window. Number one has to do with what do you do with radicalization. So we mentioned dormant terror cell, Iranian terror cells being embedded in the West, probably we think in the US and Europe most likely, but probably and could be also elsewhere. And many of these agents are probably people that were not necessarily radicalized recently. Perhaps they came, perhaps they're immigrants, perhaps they didn't go through a process of radicalization. On the other hand, we do see, especially in Europe, but also elsewhere, we see hotbeds of radicalization where people actually become radicalized, become embedded in the more radical political paradigm being offered and peddled by Iran and some of the Muslim Brotherhood branches you mentioned, Qatar, in this respect. So one question that I would like to ask you is there anything we can do? What should we do at all? Should we just give up? Should we try to think about this more coherently when we think about trying to take on the threat of terror? That's one thing. The second thing, or the second question is, what about deterrence? Israel has several platforms, several ways to deter different actors, whether they're state actors, non-state actors in the region, in different aspects of the conventional balance. How should Israel deter the Iranians, and what should we think of in this context, if at all? So I'm going to, and this is an open question, and of course, feel free to add anything you want to it. So over to you.
First of all, regarding the radicalization, the main source of radicalization right now in the world are Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is they have endless resources to finance all sorts of campaigns, either on the internet, on social platforms, or you name it, by politicians. When you know they are doing that, they are doing it in the States, they are doing that in Europe, they are doing it everywhere. So the first step that is needed in order to foil or to fight this radicalization is to outset Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi as the bad guys. And this doesn't happen. And this is something that all of us should do. Because right now, Qatar is playing some sort of a cynical role of the intermediator. because on one hand they're going with the matches and gasoline, burn down, pour on all those places they can do, and then they seemingly coming with the extinguisher to stop the fire. That we should, and the West should realize that there is a very line that should be drawn in a red line. Enough is enough. You have to choose sides. You cannot play on both ends. And this is the first, the most important and prominent thing that we should do. Now, we should learn from de-radicalization that happened in the Emirates. First of all, is getting out of the textbooks at schools all those racist, all those jihadistic that are explicitly are in the Quran. They are in the Quran. It's not something that you can bypass. It's in the Quran, but simply don't teach it. Don't teach it. Don't let your children be engaged in that sort of education. And it can happen, and they actually reflected it in a very impressive way in the Emirates. If you conduct some polls in the Emirates, you don't see this hatred toward the infidels, you don't see the hatred toward the Jews, you don't see jihadism, and it can happen. And so it's very important to work on that, especially in the communities in Europe that are almost completely detached from the Western society and Western values and are living in some sort of a internal ghetto. And we see third generation that are almost in France, in London, and you name it, that are engaged with this fundamentalism and so on. So these are the most crucial things and that we should do on the immediate base, not wait for something to happen. Then, of course, we have the social media platforms that we have. It's very difficult to engage because we have billions of Muslims and very few Jews that cannot really give a fight, but we should do it, and we should try to engage with a lot of, I would say, Christians, with a lot of humanism, because what happened is that there was a very peculiar link between Western values of humanism, democracy, civil rights, and jihadism. It's almost the progressive is almost became part of the jihad because they are useful idiots. And so we should try to reach as much as possible the youngsters, especially has no idea about anything because what they get is from the TikTok or from some social media. So people like Tucker Carlson and others, in order to make them understand the complexity and the multi-layer of what is happening.
Thank you. So, Oded Ailam, thank you so much for this very interesting, thought-provoking conversation. Oded, you're the former head of Counterterrorism Division at the Mossad, and currently you're a researcher based at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. And our conversation is also going to be available for people to watch on YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, thank you, Oded, for making time for us.
Thank you.
And may we see a peaceful resolution of all the conflicts in the Middle East soon. And we won't need to have these ongoing webinars on the issue. Thank you so much, Oded.
Thank you.